All right. So the academic title of this conversation is The Generalizability of Knowledge as Explored Through the Medium of Art and Song. So what I mean to say about that is that a lot of times if you do something like you draw or you code or you play music or something, somebody tells you that they can't do that, that it's really cool that you can do that, but they can't do that. And when I talk to people, I think it's often because they think that there's something fundamentally different about a creative task, like painting or making music, to something everybody does, like tying their shoes or cooking. Yeah, that was right. So
I've been running into this for my entire life because I was inclined to draw relatively early on, and even as early as elementary school, I was having people tell me that it was something that they weren't capable of just because it's something that they did not do as much as me.
Yeah, and so that's the basic thing I've noticed with musicians. Musicians are really talented, like skilled musicians. Most of the ones I've met and the ones that I've observed the media, they tend to be maniacs. And what I mean by that is that they operate in a state of tunnel vision where they're very focused on one thing, often for completely extrapolated ideas. So you might learn how to become an excellent fencer to impress a woman, but it's 2015 and you're basing that off of a manual you're reading from 200 years ago because you have this idea, you have like this romance. And that's the kind of bend that sort of, I think oftentimes people see as creativity, is that this stuff is just like a adapted strategy. People are doing things over and over and over again because they think it is the means to an end. So coders, oftentimes they'll code up a whole video game in like 40 hours. There's like game jams where everybody does that.
Yep.
And they're kept up because they're on adrenaline because they're trying to impress everybody else in their peer group. And so the reason I use the example of like trying to impress women is because musicians are sort of notoriously like, that's the musician stereotype.
Well, it also just seems to be a lot of the motivation for a lot of people to do a lot of things, to do pretty much anything.
Yeah.
I think that you probably wouldn't have as many people getting in trouble for sexual misconduct if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and so I think that a lot of times when people can't feel that they can get into something that has maybe you have to spend lots of hours before you put anything out that's decent, like drawing is a good example. You have to spend a lot of time drawing to draw a human that looks decent. And so you have to be full of energy, full of time, and then basically devoting yourself to a particular thing that if you think that you can perfect that skill. And so it's just...
it's just to reiterate, devoting yourself to failing specifically over and over and over again to do something at the level that you actually want to do it at.
Right. So that's the big thing, is that if you are sort of tunnel visioned about something, failure isn't as much of a primary setback because your consciousness is one-dimensional. You are getting pushed backwards, but there's not really any left and right to do. You're focused on this right thing. So I think the personalities that tend to lend themselves well to musicians and artists, and I think this is why oftentimes you see talented artists that are schizophrenic or bipolar, or I think that the personality tends to lead itself to some sort of either just mania generally or some sort of more pronounced like manic depressive cycle,
or like obsessive behavior.
Obsessive behavior is a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times the difference between the artist is the one that didn't destroy all their brushes, was worried enough about their working space that they kept working in the job they hated for 5 years to keep in their studio, stuff like that. The make and break isn't necessarily based on talent. It's not necessarily based on the potential output they could have in perfect circumstances. It's who got through. And so that's why, I mean, people you get in these fringe fields like music and art tend to be people see as having these outsized personalities because they had to push themselves to an extreme, and when you're working on something, there's not usually a bunch of people doing that at the same time. Art movements, a lot of times there'd be a lot of people in one place, but I think nowadays people work more in solitude, and so that adds another element to it. Is there's no regular place for someone to see me play maybe guitar every night or every week, and so it seems like more of a magical thing than it is. The same thing with drawing and painting. When we see drawings, even graphite sketches, people sell those for a lot of money. And so everything's been turned into a potential finished product.
Well, people want to be producing finished products as quickly as possible. It leads to like low effort avenues of creation, instead of spending more time trying to figure out how to create a better product, trying to create the actual products that you would wish to sell. They just try to figure out how to make saleable items as quickly as possible.
Well, I think a lot of energy is wasted in everyone having to maximize for that variable because there's not existing studios, and the ones that there are very underfunded to hire young artists. So there are some comic studios, for instance, that do a very good job of this, like Dark Horse, which has been financially stable for decades and hopefully continues to be so. Dark Horse Comics. But if you think about any of our media, the music is made in one of two cities. Hip-hop's brought other cities into that a little more. And then there's, people self-record and release, and sometimes that stuff gets public attention. But films are made mostly out of one city. That will probably change soon. But basically, there's these insular communities, and so the people that have these skills become associated with the cultures of those communities, which, from the perspective of an artist, is very bad, because it tends to mean that innovation is stifled. People conform to an orthodoxy. You have like a zero-sum problem where there just isn't enough money in the pool. And so...
Not everybody can move to Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad maximizers for it. So Nashville is a good example because it's supposed to be rural music, but in order to make it, you have to move to a big city. And so the people who are probably have the potential of being some of your best artists might never come to Nashville unless they hold it in their heart as a place of particular honor, which they may or may not, because there's plenty of artists that got fed up with the Nashville establishment who command a lot of respect now, like Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, or Waylon Jennings. So it's not that people that tend to develop these skills, I don't believe, have a natural aptitude to the skills in particular. It's what's moving the fingers or whatever. It's what's making you do it.
It's like a personality type rather than like having some sort of genetic variables that make you better at drawing people's faces.
People that tell me they want to be able to play instruments are almost always more agreeable than me. They almost always have sort of a more, what a lot of people I think would see as a rounded personality. I really think in some ways that when you commit to a lifestyle, you become a mutant, and increasingly.
Yeah, the Hagakure, which is a Japanese book that's basically about people talking to each other. talks about how you have to be very narrowly focused to get good enough at something to be able to understand things in a broad sense. You can't really try to be good at two things, or else you're never going to be particularly good at one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly found. So, what I find is very useful is first, it's very hard to get around having to build up that skill in the first place and what that entails. And for a lot of people, their childhood sort of pushes them into it and there's less friction. And so for people that want to do this as adults, they really have to dedicate themselves to it on some level. But plenty of adults have been able to train themselves up. There's a wilderness graphite artist who trained herself up in 2.5 years and does realistic graphite. She's obviously talented, but
I think people also just have the ability to do that at a scale and with an efficiency that we haven't really historically had. We have more access to materials like paints, like in particular. Like you would actually just have to be dedicated to procuring and using paints in the past, whereas now anybody who works a normal job can buy them.
yeah.
So like training yourself up in 2 years is probably a lot easier because paints aren't prohibitively expensive.
Well, I think part of the challenge is that these historical artists they had to do these things. They had to haggle with foreign traders over the price of lapis lazuli, and they had to have broad skills. They had to have well adapted means of securing patronage. And so as an artist or a musician, I think you need to do tons of stuff that's not the main thing you're trying to do, because no matter what you're doing, you don't spend that much time doing it. A writer might spend 3 hours a day if he's Stephen King. And you need to challenge yourself constantly because there's not enough natural challenge.
I guess I want to push back on that a little bit because a lot of people feel like 3 hours a day is the extent of their free time.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, is that Stephen King is a person who is particularly verbose and well published. He puts out like 4 books a year, and he spends less than 3 hours a day. And so what I'm saying is if you are learning, you can spend an hour a day on it. If you can't take an hour a day out 5 days a week for something that you value, you can try to do it slower. But, I mean, you can try to do it slower.
You can also try to binge on it and do it for 10 hours a day on your free days, but you're going to get burned out.
Yeah, I mean, so learning generally, I think you want to do things just starting out with an instrument, maybe 15 or 30 minutes a day. Traditional teaching methods for art and music, I do not fill me with any confidence. And so I do get why people think I do get why people have the aversion that they have, is because people go to high school and high school art teaches people to hate art.
Yes, it is the best indoctrination that you could give somebody to think that it's impossible to get better at art.
I think the same thing about music. It presents music as something that's naturally regimented, and music is the opposite. Music, I mean, it's just it's very people end up with a very strange idea about what music is, and competencies that are very restricted as far as the instruments they're playing and how they're playing them. Very few people graduate out of band with an ability to improvise, for instance.
I think that people also have a weird idea of what art or music is because a lot of what they're perceiving as art and music is seen and heard through advertising.
So one thing that's very odd is that there's a critical theory approach which is just a branch of philosophy that's influential right now, and in particular was, I think, more influential in the past. And they look at they look at cinema as art. Cinema's not art. So it's not made by artists. It's not designed by artists. It's generally written by technicians. And so what I mean by this is it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, to make every Batman movie. The things in the Batman movie are predetermined by market attitudes. This is not what art is. If you want to think about it as a percentage, then maybe your percentage of how art it is gets eaten away and there's some acceptable amount of this stuff.
Yeah, so do you think that art films exist? Do you think that if you have 5 people working on a film, do you think that
Yes.
that like Looper or not
Yes.
Looper
or Clerks.
and what's the one I'm thinking, the time travel movie?
So I mean, I guess that's the I never
Primer.
had
Primer.
Yeah, I never had an attachment to cinema, and what cinema means as a word is the big crappy movie theaters that play 80 Avengers movies at once.
Yes.
So I will call that cinema, and I'll call it the things that I'm talking about a film or a movie, I guess, because Star Wars clearly art. A bunch of people, a bunch of young people coming together. Bunch of people get screwed out of recognition. It's like a perfect example of a collaborative art project. One person walks away with most of the money and most of the credit. That's how collaborative art projects work. But once you get to people who are modeling things off of Star Wars based on a pre-established business model, the first inspiration has nothing to do with changing how people think or making people feel a particular way or think in a particular way or see something in a particular way. And that's what art is. And so it's just critical theory ends up examining corporate output as if it's art.
I think that you could make a pretty good argument that contemporary Star Wars movies are trying to make people think or feel in a particular way.
Yeah, so that's right. So the tools of art can be used in creating propaganda. And propaganda is a word that in American English is very underused because people, Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, trained as a propaganda artist in, I believe, World War I, and he came back and he used those techniques against the American people in order to get them to buy more things. He thought what he was doing was patriotic. He thought he was furthering the interests of the United States against communism. And so he openly said that he renamed propaganda.
Public relations.
Very well documented.
And we keep on using different terms to describe propaganda, the most recent one being fake news.
Right. So just again, Edward Bernays, I think it's Bernays. I'll link to his Wikipedia article. Hopefully I catch that in editing. But yes, so you keep moving the goalpost. People say things like whataboutisms and concern trolling and fake news and all of these new terms for things that already have pre-existing terms. And this doesn't increase clarity. And I mean, all you have to do as a movie producer is convince every generation that to have enough benefit of the doubt, basically, to keep watching your films. They don't have to be sold that what you're doing is great, but people grow old and they get interested in other things. They watch less movies as they grow older. And so in the past, it's been like the same cycles repeating over and over again. But now every movie sticks around forever. People watch things in a more uniform way. Like all of that stuff's changing. And so I don't know if corporate boardrooms will be able to keep up. They might not be able to, and there might be a room for... I mean, I think that streaming companies are trying to branch out, but they're hiring people that are just doing the same stuff.
I think that the boardrooms will be able to keep up. They'll have access to new technology to gather viewer data, and they'll be able to make better decisions based off of that.
Yeah.
Particularly with most of these movies being viewed through streaming services. Yeah. Like you know when people stop watching the movies, you know when people lose interest. Like you can tell how many episodes of something people will watch in a row, and what type of episode like turns them off from the series. If the second time they see a cave episode, they decide that that's enough Star Trek or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess how this relates back to the first idea which is that oftentimes people have an established skill, if it's carpentry or art or music or filmmaking or whatever, people tend to act as if they couldn't, and they will often say explicitly, I couldn't do this myself. Film's a really good example because it's never been easier.
Yes, well, pretty much everything has never been easier, but film specifically, everybody has a camera that you can make a film with.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, as far as recording music, it's everything's easier than it's ever been. Publishing it, you don't get an audience, but you didn't before. So it's like the criticisms don't tend to align with, they tend to be the same as in past systems, basically. The drawbacks tend to be very similar.
And if you want to make relatively low effort music and invest a lot of time in like advertising it, you can be relatively successful. Time and money, I suppose.
Yeah.
There are a lot of avenues where if you invest a substantial amount of money, you can just artificially increase the number of people that are exposed to your output.
Yeah, I guess the big thing is that there is what you could call a booming film movement, but it is this stuff, and I think it's just video recorded, honestly. I don't think it's really film, but in an academic way, you could categorize this as a short film or as a film. But so I just don't see that in narrative film. I don't see like 8 awesome horror movies shot on iPhones coming out a year.
Right.
There's enough people for that.
One thing that I've noticed with, I don't watch a lot of film, but I do try to keep track of what's happening with animation. And animation has just progressively been getting lower and lower effort. And the output has been more numerous. So now the current trend is to make shows that are attempting to look like they're animated two-dimensionally with 3D models that are specifically designed to resemble hand-drawn characters. And they just excrete series after series in this way. It seems like very cheap.
So this is actually because when you read about magicians, a lot of artists, MC Escher, they see art as an illusion.
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to provide an illusion of a real thing, you're trying to provide an illusion
of an illusion. Yes.
Yeah, and that's the issue with music too. It doesn't it's not focused on the central aspects of it. It's all an illusion of an illusion.
Yeah. We are getting a little off track though, in terms of like deviating from our original point. Yeah.
So I mean, I guess just with everything, if you get good at one thing, it gets easier to get good at other things because you remember the process.
Yeah. Just the act of developing skills is a skill in and of itself. You figure out how to learn better. You figure out how to more efficiently spend your time figuring out how to do things. You can tell when somebody is saying that they will teach you something or give you a guide to something, but they're actually bullshitting you. You get a sense for what is going to be good information and what's going to be bad information. Well,
the one thing is that I think one of the central skills anyone can build is information all comes from people. And a young person that's trying to throw together a YouTube channel that they're hurriedly trying to maybe they've been playing guitar for 2 years and it's a bunch of guitar tutorials. I see that a lot. Or recording tutorials for people who've been in it in like 2 years and stuff like that. You learn pretty quickly, often from the cadence of how the people are talking or what they're talking about, you learn pretty quickly how new this person is, especially because if they're aware, they'll say they're new. They'll extol their own ignorance. And those are often very good people to watch. But it's when people think that they're very good at something they've only been doing for a year and a half, you learn to spot that pretty quick. They are very often focused on elements of the production that are not really related to providing information or for showing you how better to do the thing. There's often iconography or symbology in the channel that either makes it look like other people's stuff and makes it clear that they're trying to quickly transition into this. But likewise, you can have someone hit it right away and just be very good with tools and make videos. And one of them is AVX, is that Canadian guy. Almost all of his videos are shot in first person, and he takes apart the tools and he shows you how to use them. So there's no faking that. I mean, like if this guy has 700 videos and he isn't electrocuted. And so there's stuff you can pretty quickly pull up. Most everyone on the internet, if they're on it for 2 years, if they're unstable, they will have lost their mind at somebody on the internet. And so there will be a clip of them like screaming or like texts of them death threatening someone over Facebook Messenger.
Or like they'll accidentally upload a video of them abusing their dog. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's like people are people. No one's an ultimate authority of information. If the person knew perfect information, the likelihood is that our language is not perfect enough for them to perfectly transmit it to you. So there would still be some onus on you to figure out the veracity of the information. I think the best way to do anything is to do the thing. If it's not dangerous, if failure doesn't cause death,
We just got to click.
Yeah. If failure doesn't cause death, then your cost, or like supreme embarrassment or disembowelment or something, then your cost is relatively low to give it a try. And stuff that's cheap and easy to get started on, guitars cost, you can get a guitar that will be good enough for 5 years for $200 or less. You can buy drawing supplies very cheap. You can get high quality artist drawing supplies for like 50 to 80 cents a pencil and not go through more than one pencil a day. You can work in very limited mediums, which are very cheap. There's YouTube tutorials on things like perspective and basic skill building. If you look for YouTube tutorials, you'll notice that they keep making the same ones, which will show you the more important steps more likely than not.
And there are plenty of places to buy the supplies that you need. There are a lot of places, like you can buy them from small business. You can buy them from Staples or Michaels, but you can also just buy them from small businesses online, and they'll gladly ship them to you.
Yeah.
Most people are buying most things online, but you can actually get like decent brushes or inks or whatever if you just want to go down to Michael's and get them.
Yeah. Anyone that's getting started in any of this stuff, I would suggest, unless you're trying to get into something computer specific like 3D modeling, I would suggest using the analog version first, getting an analog instrument and learning how to play that, as opposed to a synthesizer or one of those programmable pads.
That's true with physical art too. I would argue that even if you want to get into 3D modeling, you probably should sculpt first. You should buy some sculpting clay and figure it out, because 3D modeling is a facsimile of sculpting in the same way that making digital music or using a digital brush pad or whatever is analogous to the physical medium.
Yeah, and so the other thing is that there's going to be a lot of digital tools, recording equipment associated with these. Don't buy them. You don't need it. I mean, I don't have a smartphone, but everyone else does. Smartphones very adequately record your music, and if you're not songwriting, if you're just like recording other people's music, you don't necessarily need to get into recording yourself right away. Lots of people recommend it.
Frequently doing as much as you can with as little as you can for a while and is a good idea because it lets you figure out what it is that you actually need to invest your resources into.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is why all the rich people don't make good art. I mean, this is why like all of these kids that went to art school aren't making like super awesome dank paintings. They're all going to art school. All these like heiresses and heirs are going to art school. They're getting training in the best art schools in the world, and then they're not making good art because everything's available to them. They never have to struggle. They don't have to like see whether or not they're going to go insane because they're doing something that is like objectively ridiculous, which is like slapping paint on a canvas or plucking cables on a.
And they still might eventually run into that. They'll eventually figure out that they've been making low tier art for years and years and might have a crisis regarding that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it's Porfirio Jimenez on YouTube is like an artist that's very limited in his medium, and as such he's pushed it basically to the limit. I think that spray paint coming out of cans, he doesn't even use he's a spray paint artist and he doesn't even use a spray gun. And so I mean, eventually maybe you should pick a medium that's like more environmentally friendly. I think that's definitely.
What you mean? You probably shouldn't be using aerosols and fire inside of your house.
Yeah, well, yeah. But yeah, well, that's a good thing to understand about art is a lot of it has these sort of attached traditions or aesthetic elements that you might want to question as soon as you get into it.
I think this might be controversial for some people, but I think one of the really big ones that you should question with painting and physical art specifically is that drugs will make you better at it.
Yes.
I think that some people respond well to drugs, but Frank Zappa had a pretty good strategy of telling people that they should not do drugs when they're playing with him and that he would kick them out of his band if they did. I don't think that drugs should be illegal, but I also don't think it's going to make you better at making art. Most drugs don't make you learn better.
Yeah. Alcohol in particular has just like crippled basically every songwriter that I followed one way or the other. I mean, Warren Zevon was a very good songwriter, but he drank a lot and his development definitely stalled. A lot of these people, they went on touring schedules where they were just drinking and doing drugs like all the time. And these people right now are deified as, well, maybe not Zevon so much as David Bowie. These people right now are deified, but they're deified by a corporate culture that is trying to profit as much from their image right now as they can. And you don't see a lot of public acknowledgement that maybe Bowie wasted a lot of time doing cocaine. Like maybe that wasn't the best use of his time. And maybe if we present him as a role model to young people, we might want to say, hey, wait a minute.
And maybe his songs would have been better if he had spent more time writing them or recording better takes of them.
Yeah.
Please don't kill me.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree. There is this cartoon in my head of like this festival kid, and he just like does tons and tons and tons of drugs, and he thinks that he is every type of artist, every type of writer, every type of philosopher. And he has an Instagram page that has like 700 different colored icons on it that like, and it's just like, it's a picture of a camera, a picture of a whale, a picture of a football. It's just like, this person is supposedly the jack of all trades, and then they're just like a burnout that just like goes to festivals all summer.
Yep.
And there's that like turns people off from the idea of pursuing art. It makes them think that art isn't like a serious thing that is exacting, or
it makes them think that they need to do hard drugs to do art, and that there is like a separate type of human that isn't afraid of being killed by drugs that can create art, or like only crazy people or people willing to risk going insane because of either because of the way they were born, like we were talking about earlier, or their willingness to expose themselves to questionable substances. Like that just is a perception of physical art in particular that I've seen from a lot of people. I've also seen a lot of artists that would be much better if they didn't worship the drugs that they took to make the art, if they didn't think that they had to take them to make their output.
If Alex Gray just took 2 years off, like just went up to BC, like lived in a log cabin, just went clean and clear.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. A lot of stuff, it's just this feedback loop. And it's because that's how commercial markets, I think, tend to organize themselves. I think music and art.
Alex Gray is a very good example, though, because he is as invested in this kind of drug culture as he is in the art that he's making, him and his wife. And I like the stuff that they produce. And I like that they're trying to build a community around art, and that they're trying to like build like physical structures and kind of like social structures. But I also think that there is a very strange unilateral focus in his life's work on psychedelics.
I think that artists, in order to survive financially and emotionally, often insulate themselves from the general populace. And they stop trying to produce art for everybody, or they never start. They might think it's impossible.
Well, I think you realize that there's always going to only be a small group of people buying your art.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just try to cater directly to their audience instead of having something specifically that they're trying to say.
Yeah.
I don't know if this happens as much with writers, because writers try to be as broadly readable as they can. But you're still writing inside of genre confinement. And
man, are there writers? Are there writers?
Do
you know any writers?
There are people writing books. They still publish books from time to time. Neil Stephenson is still alive.
Yeah, that's true.
And I get book recommendations fairly regularly from people who have read a book within the last 3 years. One thing that concerns me a bit is that a lot of the books that I've had recommended to me are only published through Amazon, and that's the only way that you can get them.
Yeah, putting your stuff on Spotify or having it only on Spotify seems to me like you're just selling yourself down the river. Allowing one company to have a monopoly on music is a very, very bad idea. It's probably the worst thing to have a monopoly on.
It's like putting all of your eggs in one basket if that basket is on somebody else's bicycle.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just the general competency of these companies to stay afloat in extreme times is not something that we can take for granted.
And it's easier to publish your own work now than it ever has been.
Yeah, sometimes talking to other artists or musicians, it's like living in a mirror world where they're seeing something you're not seeing, where like record companies still exist and like galleries matter.
And you have to give somebody else money so that they can order CDs for you instead of just ordering them yourselves.
Well, and it's the same thing with like the idea is that it like turns into a gallery show, but like for a lot of visual artists, they might pay to put their stuff in a pop-up gallery, for instance, and that probably sells you paintings.
Sure, but speaking from experience, you can also rent 3 hotel rooms and do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of stuff up here popping up that is, I mean, before Corona, that was multi-use sort of performance spaces, but none of it was really well built to be a musical space, and acoustics are important in musical spaces. And
most of them that I had experience with had particularly horrible acoustics.
yeah,
You would see some sort of laughable effort where they'll put up one acoustic panel in the room or something like that.
yeah, I mean, and it is kind of less important for electric music, like rock style music, because that isn't supposed to be good or sound good. So it doesn't really matter if it's bouncing around or you can't hear the vocals or whatever, because you're just there to get blasted and turn your brain into jelly.
The hope is to either get yourself blasted or to blast others, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like a blaster be blast, as Sun Tzu said. If you are not the blaster, you must be the
You'll
one who
become
can
the
blast.
blasted, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean this has been pretty roundabout, but basically if you've learned to do anything difficult with muscle memory involved, man, my nose is itchy. I'm like Slavoj Žižek. I've been thinking about, since I do this already, I've been thinking about just going all in, because you can make fun of Slavoj Žižek because he's just like some European guy. Like, it's okay to make fun of Slavoj Žižek just all the time, but my problem is I think that I would just eventually, like, it would take a day.
You become the thing that you hate, yeah.
And I would just become him, yeah. Yeah, so it's just, I think there's a generalizability of knowledge. The patterns that you undertake when you're learning new things have commonalities that are difficult to express in language. But if you have gotten good at cooking, if you've gotten good at DMing your D&D group, there are generalizabilities to your skills, and they translate much better than you think into music. If you're good at working with spreadsheets, that really could make a difference when you get into art, because you've been looking at things subdivided into tens. Like, you never know what you'll be drawing on when you're learning a new skill.
Yep. And you will frequently find yourself saying, like, oh, this is very similar to X, where X is something that you have already established for yourself as a skill.
Yeah, and so a bunch of ancient philosophers talked about honing skills, understanding the world through skills. It is, I think, a thing almost anybody can do. There are so many things to be interested in. There are so many things to learn about. There are so many corridors of knowledge that are sort of closing.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you bring that up, because something I hear from a lot of young people younger than myself, people younger than 20, is that they feel crippled by how many things that there are that are available to them. They don't want to invest their time in the wrong thing, because there's like this like reverse time sink fallacy, and it can be difficult to explain to them that you should just be doing something that you can bear to do, that is interesting for you to do, and then you can change your mind later, and a bunch of what you already learned is going to be applicable to the new thing.
Yeah, in the past, an authority figure would have been inducing you in some way into learning these skills, either because you had to eat or because you wanted to earn their positive appraisal or whatever. So that's what's tough for young people, and I tend to agree. I mean, you can transition something you learn how to do when you're 16. You don't have to do that for your career or for your whole life or whatever. I mean, in particular, I don't see an argument for not learning how to use computers. If you're a young person, you can't, what they call touch type, you can't type at like 60, 80 words per minute.
I don't see an argument for using computers if you don't know how to use computers. It seems like it only has a negative effect on people who can't at least like problem solve technical issues with their computer. it just seems to have it just seems to have a deleterious effect when the only thing that you're doing is interacting with media that's being fed to you through advertising platforms. It's just going to waste your time. And I mean, I don't know, this could be confirmation bias, but if you don't have like some sort of an idea of how the processes on your computer are working, you're just going to have the wool pulled over your eyes.
It seems like a magic black box. Yeah. So you don't know what a virus is, what malware is, what the zero kernel or the zero ring on your kernel is, what a kernel is.
Or what like root permission is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the scams that are successful, the tech support scams, are just very pathetic, but people just have very low technical knowledge. And I think the issue is that a big part of it is this push towards simplification and streamlining. It has disincentivized people from learning technical literacy. And so, like, some users have experienced backslides because they used to have to work harder to do the same thing, and now it's automatically done.
On a lot of contemporary software platforms, phones, and even like Windows operating system, a lot of the files or settings or modes that you might want to access are visually hidden from the user. They are invisible, or for example, like developer mode on your phone is inside of not only a hierarchy of menus, but also a hidden menu that you have to do a button combination to unlock.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about software becoming sociology, or software becoming society, I should have said, or software becoming politics. If people don't understand these softwares, then feature decisions could be made that affect how laws are made and how children are taught and how police do their jobs. Like, you never know if people don't understand these systems, and they're not metaphorical systems. They're literal systems.
Yes.
Understandable systems. AI is a little bit different. Deep learning is a little bit different, but you usually can understand the input and output to some extent. If you don't understand these systems conceptually, there is a huge magic black box that gets stronger and bigger every day and controls more and more. And the basic concepts behind computing are not super confusing. There's tons of good YouTube videos on it. I'm sure there's a bunch of Kierkegaard where a bird tells you about binary. So if you are young, that is a good place to start. Learn any musical instrument. Be competitive about it. Find somebody that's your age and get better than them quickly. Online. Do it. Like, if you think that there's an idea that there's something wrong with being competitive in this way. There isn't. Those people, if they're trying to get better and better, they want people to be competitive, and they shouldn't be worried about you taking their traffic for your cover of Israeli Kamikachawi's Somewhere Over the Rainbow or whatever.
No, the more invested people are in that sort of media, the better it's going to be for everybody.
For everyone, yeah, because right now the big battle is pushing it into people's daily routines, basically. If people thought that it was a virtuous thing to do to seek out local artists and musicians, or not local even, just try to find underexposed
novel musicians. This was the contest between me and my friends when we were in high school and directly after high school. We were trying to one up each other to see who could find the most obscure band that was actually any good to listen to. I was overjoyed when I found this Canadian band called 3 Inches of Blood when they were first coming up on the scene, back when I used to listen to more metal, because I was just very pleased at the privilege that it was going to grant me inside of my friends group. Like, this, it sounds self-centered and silly now, but that's honestly the way that it used to be. And I feel like a lot of people just rely on the media that is provided to them now. This might be different or maybe this used to be different in some places that have active independent music scenes. When I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina, you could go to a lot of you could go to a lot of house shows there. So it's possible that this is still organically happening in 10 cities in the country, but it certainly doesn't happen here.
The economics just don't work for it. Insurance is a cartel.
So, right. So these places are having illegal shows, and that's how it's happening.
Right.
There was a place that I used to go to in Worcester that was essentially just an abandoned factory that had been converted into a venue. But these places don't last because as soon as enough people know about it, it's you can't do it anymore. And that's just not sustainable.
Yep.
Eventually you run out of abandoned buildings.
Yeah, I think that jockeying for position in your friend group is the best place to try to jockey for position, I guess, if you're going to try to be competitive, because the alternative is the internet and you don't get feedback. Everything's soft on the internet. Either a system never gives you feedback, you get automated feedback, people see your stuff in a way where everything's put.
And you don't get an accurate representation of the people that you're looking at either.
Right.
People get to spend a lot of time carefully crafting how they're presented to you, and so you're just seeing the best, what that person perceives as being the best part of themselves or their output or their discoveries, whereas your friends, and so you see the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a system providing you feedback and you understand the system and you know the people talking to you, it is essentially as if even when you're talking to these people, you are in somewhat of a void, especially because a lot of these communities are controlled. It's limited what you can post. There's moderators to contend with, stuff like that.
Yeah, what you can post or even how often you can post.
Yeah, there's no moderators with kick functions in real life.
Right.
So I think that one of the big lie that's been sold, and the media loves to sell it, is social media. We use it to do everything. Shopping, politics, finance, beauty. Social media is the new globbity gloop, town square, gloobity glop. And it's not. Social media is the new, deep, paralyzing fear of the devil that keeps people from doing anything useful. It has captured everything everybody does, and it has distilled it to the worst aspects of human society. You can call the people that you keep up with on Facebook. You can keep their numbers in a Rolodex and call them. If you need to see their face, you can look at pictures of them or you can visit them.
You can even send them a group email.
Yeah, but subcultures have eroded. Expertise has eroded.
Even web forums.
Web forums are crumbling into dust. They barely exist anymore. All of this is dying. Social media has replaced it and commodified all of it, advertised on all of it. And so this big argument, this big lie that social media is going to be able to be a tool we can use, that we can use Discord to organize politically, or this stuff will just happen automatically. It is madness.
A very good example of this is that social media, like Facebook particularly, completely absorbed all of the communication and web traffic about longboarding, downhill longboarding, slalom skateboarding, long distance pushing. All of that communication used to happen on a specialist forum called Silverfish Longboard Forums, and that forum had the combined wisdom of thousands of skateboarders. A lot of these people were the top competitors in their fields, and there were just pages after page after page after page of discussion and argument about technical specifications, direct evidence about performance of different things, research and development of products and urethane formulations for wheels, geometry specifications for products like trucks, skateboards, things like that. A lot of recorded information about road conditions, and that just all of that is gone because they couldn't even afford to pay the hosting fees.
We can stick to that camera.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of the yo-yo forums collapsed. There are a limited amount of music forums that are very over relied on as resources. When you do find good information about guitars, it's usually an old website.
And some of these, it's not like the forums and websites that still exist are getting a lot of traffic. A lot of them are just paying the hosting fees because they recognize the value of the information that's already up there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like how insurance is used in the real world to keep any small people from doing anything. There's like you can be held responsible for something someone says if you don't make them click the right disclaimer, stuff like that. Like that, the legal protections don't necessarily exist for people that corporations can use to shield themselves. Corporations get special indemnities from copyright and from stuff like that because they do deals with the record label themselves or whatever. So it's disadvantage on top of disadvantage for small websites and for independent people on the internet. And to begin with, there's no reason to put in new disadvantages. There's no reason to stack the deck any further because the biggest website's always going to have this huge advantage of being the biggest website. And so it's anti-competitive in a way that just destroys the market. eBay is a mess. eBay is a disaster because they never had a major competitor. They never fixed their website. They never fixed their seller buyer rules. They changed things gradually in ways that pissed people off and made vendors leave, and the vendors that came back were resellers who are buying stuff of Alibaba or reselling stuff at a very small markup, which makes eBay money in the short term but doesn't build people's confidence in the platform, because when eBay started, tons of people were using it and tons of people trusted it, and they gave it up. They sabotaged themselves. They threw it away, and it probably, if they had real competition, that wouldn't have happened. But
well, they had competition in some avenues, like Amazon eventually became a large competitor for them once they stopped selling just books and started allowing people to sell the stuff that they were selling on eBay before. But
people would be willing to buy on Amazon because they thought it was safe,
right,
rather than eBay, even though Amazon often has lower rates of fulfillment than eBay, because the feedback system in eBay is so brutal. If you get bad feedback, it shows up for 6 months.
Yeah.
And it makes you look really bad. Whereas in Amazon, there's tons of people with 78% feedback and stuff like that. So, and Amazon used small vendors just long enough that they could basically consume the market that they're selling in. They can either make their own version of the products or fulfill the products directly and take almost all of the profit margin. And so this is a race to the bottom where all of the wealth that would be given to middlemen, which is schleps, which is just normal workers, all of that money that would be going to us, it's all funneling to an international corporation that gets massive tax breaks and uses their tax money to influence policy. So we are at the end of doing the thing that's convenient for you in the short term and putting off the payment for it. We don't have any of that left. We can't keep doing the thing that we know is self-destructive and bad. And so I think if we have a situation where Spotify consumes all the music, consumes all the podcast, it's 90% of the market leader, and its only competitor is Apple Music, and that doesn't change, and YouTube and Twitter and all of these websites can still unaccountably ban people or hide their accounts or whatever. If we have this situation continue to get worse, not only will art and music continue to wither and die, but I mean, we will as a species. We need intercommunication. And when it is all monetized, when it's all sorted by a top-down mechanism that nobody understands, it is ridiculous to assume that that's going to be randomly sorted in a way that works for us. And so we are building machines. Corporations are building machines that nobody understands. And we're using them to guide our whole development, our cultural development, our economic development, algorithmically.
Yep.
It's automatically polarizing people.
And just like to clarify what you're talking about, because it's very important, you're talking about these algorithms that they're using not only to advertise to people, but they're also using it to direct people towards the content that they want them to view. They're using it to tell people about the products that even exist. They're using it to determine the prices that they want to give people for products, and like the input from other people that they can hear. And this isn't like a system that's catered by humans. It's a system that's automatically generated by algorithms.
Yes.
Yes.
It's tweaked by humans.
Yes, probably in most cases.
Yes.
But there aren't individuals, there are not single people in a lot of these situations that even understand how these systems work fully. They might understand a part of it, but the systems are so complicated that very few people would have a grasp of how the whole thing works.
And these are people from one of two groups. These are people who grew up in California, or these are people who moved across the country to work in a city so that they could have a particular standard of living or a particular lifestyle. So you are selecting for two particular groups of people.
Well, I think that there's also people, I don't like these duologies or whatever. I think that there's also people that are imported from other countries to work for these tech firms as well.
That's true, and there's people but ultimately the arbitration, the people making these decisions, this isn't representative of the diversity of thought or any sort of diversity across the United States. We don't have a representative. This is incredibly important. We have no representative way or democratic way even to decide how we're doing this. None of these decisions have been made, and they're just employees at subcontractors.
People who want to live in the cities that you have to live in to work for these companies. And people want some transparency on the way these algorithms work. It's something that I've seen a lot of YouTubers ask for. They just want to know exactly what it is that they have to do to get the work that they're creating viewed by people. And I don't know if there's somebody that can give them that answer.
I would be very surprised. I would be shocked. I think that there are people who can probably understand the output to an extent, and obviously they change what they're trying to censor, but when they do, it almost always overreaches and causes some sort of controversy. So it seems like the people that are changing the algorithm don't really know exactly what they're doing in a sort of one-to-one cause and effect way. But I mean, again, this is the algorithm we're talking about is systematized censorship. It is a problem that we don't need to have. It's a problem that doesn't exist, that we've manufactured out of whole cloth. And I think a part of this is because the people in cities are so precious that they don't want to conform to actual United States laws, and instead they want to go beyond that and ban people for things that aren't illegal, for things they're saying that aren't vaguely illegal, that just express a not orthodox view, a heterodox view. And so it's just a tremendous crisis of confidence when it plays out in this way, and the only way people are given to communicate with each other is using these very few websites. And it just doesn't seem like they're concerned about fair arbitration. They speak as if they are partisans. So whether or not you agree or disagree with the position they're taking, they act as political partisans.
Yes. Which
is going to probably not work out for the businesses in the long run. Right now, you're seeing new lawsuits against YouTube for copyright claims.
I didn't read into it, but I did see that there is potentially an incredibly large one.
So YouTube has gotten a sort of preferential treatment because they did a backroom deal with record companies years ago. And I think some of the record companies are reconsidering it. And then the lawsuit that I saw was artists that were claiming they were getting locked out by larger record companies, which they probably are. But yeah, I mean, we just don't need the censorship algorithm. People don't need to be told what to think, because if the ideas are like really stupid and bad, the people who are going to be maximally deluded by those ideas are probably not going to find them on their own. If you sort things by view, or you sort things just by time uploaded, or you have people submit things into categories, these older solutions don't run as automatically, and they're messy, sometimes in really embarrassing ways. But trying to devote more and more and more and more people to comb through algorithmically harvested data, I don't think is really the way forward. Oh my gosh, look at you. But censorship doesn't work. It's a bad strategy because it doesn't work, especially in a free society. And the people doing it are the people that their only strength is free speech. I mean, the only thing that ultimately they can use to defend themselves against larger businesses or larger interests is free speech.
Well, it's the thing that made the platforms interesting to begin with. The reason that YouTube was a compelling place to go for so many years was because you could just see anything that was put up there by anybody.
And this isn't just one of these platforms. This is every one of these platforms.
All of them
sold themselves as free speech platforms.
Twitter and Twitch and
Facebook. Share what you're thinking.
Facebook for
Tell
sure.
us what you're thinking. It used to say something like that.
Yeah.
And so, do you want people to tell you what they're thinking, or do you want them to repeat to you the orthodoxy? And yeah, I mean, it's quite the turnaround. And I don't know why they think it. I just don't think it's going to work.
Yeah. I also just don't see the value for the people using the services or for the services themselves to segregate the ideology of the content that they have, because even in these situations where you're not being completely censored, a lot of times you're being put into a chute where the service thinks that you have conservative views, so they'll give you a bunch of conservative news outlets. And it seems to me like if they actually were partisan in some way, like if you were a video site that is, leans liberal, you would probably want to take these people who you identify as being right-wing or alt-right or whatever and feed them center leftists or people with more liberal views.
Right. It just shoves you.
But it just tries to give you more of the extreme of the content that it thinks that you want.
Yes.
If you're watching Tucker Carlson, it will probably start feeding you white nationalists.
Dude. And for me, it just autoplays like the videos that it's obviously trying to push over and over again. And so you have this really bad feedback loop problem where it just decides that I think there's just a hidden category of people who are talking that they don't like, that they put in a bin, because as soon as you become a user that's associated with those accounts, you see all of them. And they're mostly people who are seen as conservative, but a lot of them aren't. And so it's like there's just some sort of forbidden zone that you can enter without realizing it. And then you're seeing everybody that's just in this risque category.
And you're not seeing people outside of it.
No.
Unless you're on the front page of the the service, where like the most viewed or the hot picks or whatever. But if you're just in your suggested viewing, it is just going to be right the twilight zone of like I don't even know what to call it, like the people who talk about how much they're being censored.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of them. There's David Pacman does it. Kyle Kalinske does it. But then
So does Sargon of Akkad,
Sargon of Akkad
or Count Dankula,
yeah,
or
Tim Pool,
Steven Crowder.
I've seen like the legal channels do it sometimes. I mean, they just say that if we talk about X, this is going to be demonetized. So check out my Patreon, check out my merch. So
go to band.video and buy some pills.
Band.video. Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing, is like the Alex Jones thing. I really find to be an issue because like he says crazy shit all the time. There should be a person who has a YouTube channel where they say like Alex Jones today.
Alex Jones Watch. Like, yes.
Alex Jones talked about dismembering a pig, rolling in its entrails, and screaming about freedom.
But you can't do that.
I mean, people can upload the videos, but the accounts get flagged or the videos get taken down. And it's like no one can properly criticize it. So it seems to me like it just is going to have the effect of propping these people up longer.
And you're also just giving him martyr status.
Yes,
which is very, very powerful for somebody in his position, specifically for somebody in his position whose market is largely unhinged people with a persecution complex. Like I watch his program sometimes, and the people who call in are energized by the fact that the system is very obviously rigged against Alex Jones. It's not a good thing.
No, I mean, it's not, and it ties things into the narrative that he's trying to set. I mean, he built a platform for himself expecting this to happen, which would probably suggest that he plays it up to try to continue to grow as a business or to try to continue to survive as a business. It's hard to know what his viewership is, if it's grown or if it hasn't.
He is certainly doing well enough for himself that he can talk about spending $1 million on something and it being an investment for him.
Well, I guess that's the thing. And Alex Jones kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. If you're crazy about something, if you're manic about something, if you think that the global government is going to like come kill you or poison your water or brainwash you, that instills this mania and this idea of it's okay to fail because this is a means to an end. I'm trying to get something done. And so that's why a lot of times you see these people that are essentially outsider artists like Alex Jones, who instead of receiving like a sort of divine, there's Christian elements to his message, but it's not really that, but he has this sort of impetus that would have to be some sort of
I don't know if you can be Christian and talk in a demon voice. I think that's probably something that they tell you not to do in the Bible.
Right. And so he's just like, he built this narrative that worked well enough for himself. People saw him and then were offered a place. So we're offered a place to hone skills that they found were important. So now he has like long-term employees, and it's just, for better or for worse, a lot of the people that get good at stuff, a lot of the people that are influential in the public might be short-sighted, sort of selfish actors like Alex Jones, who have a disproportionate effect because not enough people are putting on news shows. It's easy to do and anyone can do it, and people could counteract the narrative if things were more open to people. but everything's sort of set up to just reward a few people on the top in every category.
I've also noticed that this funneling of viewers into specific categories leads people like Tim Pool, David Pacman to become more partisan. It like really, like I was talking about earlier, you realize that your output is reaching a very limited audience, and then you start specializing your output for that audience. Sargon of Akkad was doing that to an extreme extent for a while, and I think has probably stepped back on it to one degree or another more recently. But Tim Pool is ramping it up.
Oh yeah,
like a lot,
like
a lot.
Health with Tim or whatever, which just redirects to somebody else's like collagen supplements. You just eat collagen out of a sack so that your joints work better. Yeah.
But I mean, he's obviously identified that when he talks about pro-Trump things, he like those videos are more popular. When he is more critical of the left, it's more profitable for him. And so these are the things that he focuses on. This is the way that his videos are advertised to you with their titles and their thumbnails. And this is a person who started out from a critical position.
So here's the thing. He often says stuff that indicates that he has the capacity to analyze situations, which seems to indicate that he is doing what he's doing. He's distorting his message intentionally to probably pay for more people to be on his payroll and to enrich himself. And I mean, his bottom line's always shifting. They're always taking out ads.
But this is happening because of the way that these algorithms are funneling viewers. Yes.
Yeah, he feels like I think that a lot of these people feel like they're getting radicalized to one side or the other because there are lines for a lot of people, and free speech is a line for a lot of people. And so they'll probably side with whoever is doing less censorship at the time, regardless of their history of previous censorship. That said, censorship is at a level in the United States that it has not been in our lifetime. There's nothing comparable to this in the 90s or the early 2000s. Censorship is being realized on a scale that has never been imaginable. The telescreen in 1984 does not move with you. There are a bunch of them.
But there are places that you can go where you can't be seen by a telescreen.
Although often there's secret telescreens there.
Yes.
But
you take the telescreen with you.
Yes.
And sometimes you put it on your wrist so that it can listen to your heartbeat and your voice simultaneously.
Ouch. So yeah, I mean, it is a combination of factors that I think it's sort of weakening all of these systems that people need to inform themselves and to learn how the world works. And I guess to get back to what we were initially saying, which is just this appearance of difference. Journalism is something that's different. Art is different. Music's different. These are things that journalists do and artists do and musicians do. And they're not. Good musicians did other stuff. Good artists did other stuff. Most of the ones in the 20th century fought in wars. I mean, and it's not like fighting in a war is the end-all, be-all way to express yourself as an excellent human or as an essential thing for people to do, but I'm just saying...
But it does give you something to write about.
It gives you something to write about, gives you something to paint about. Yeah, and so these are just people. And the people that could be the most interesting artists and musicians are the people that don't engage because they have other stuff to do, whereas the people that are spending their 20s or whatever making art and music, they often have nothing to say because they haven't gotten out and tasted the glassy grit of the jungle.
And a lot of people have very protected youths now.
Yes.
Very inorganic experiences as young people. Not like eating McDonald's inorganic, but like a very controlled situation Like helicopter parenting, I think, is one of the terms that people use for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have known several of these kids. It is certainly detrimental to their development as adults.
Yep. Yeah, it's very strange. It's very selective. Oftentimes, these are people that are willing to trust experts. So it's a really weird combination that you're willing to trust an expert onto the most important thing in your life, which is raising your child. But you're obviously extra concerned about it. And so, yeah, it has a very, I think it has mostly a negative effect. I don't think it does anyone any favors. I mean,
I think that probably in some ways it is good to not have your community teaching you how to raise a child if your community is a religious cult that like kisses snakes or something. But I think that's an extreme scenario, and you're probably missing out a lot by not having a community help you raise your children.
in the first episode of this podcast, Matt and I talked about introducing your children to dangerous people with knives and criminal histories. So that will work well with that.
This is something. This is possibly not the best thing to admit to, but like I have gone on a lot of road trips with younger people, and I have no issue with exposing them to homeless people, with exposing them to wandering like drug addicts, because most of these people aren't violent, and it has a lasting effect on them and really really powerfully illustrates that the real world actually exists. And I mean, these are skateboarding trips, so it's somewhat unavoidable. Skateboarding culture is a place where you're going to be exposed to stuff like this pretty frequently. It's not like I'm taking people to slums, but these are experiences that people who don't live in large cities don't have to have firsthand, because they can just have their whole youth carefully controlled for them by their parents.
And lack of exposure to homeless people, for instance, might make you more afraid when you see them in your day to day, and so you treat them less like humans, possibly, or you walk past them, avoid eye contact, and it's just.
Or it might make you believe them all of the time and give them all of your money, so which is probably not the best thing to do.
Yep. Well, yeah. So if you do anything that involves any use of your brain, a novel way of exercising that is a good way of gaining perspective on what you're doing generally and in life. Nothing's magic except for extreme physical tasks that you're just not adapted to. Like some people probably can't be distance runners because their feet are broken or something.
Oh yeah, like, or you get bad knees or bad lungs or something like that.
Yep. But you can play guitar sitting, standing, laying down. You can paint sitting, standing, laying down. Most people have. And this seems like maybe it's a crazy time to get into this stuff, but these are the types of activities you can spend 15, 30 minutes on and go do something else. And it will probably help you maintain some sort of perspective.
Well, right now, it will probably also help you maintain sanity.
Yeah, right. And so it's just like the stuff doesn't cost a lot. You can probably find pencils and paper for free. If you don't have them in your house, ballpoint pens work.
If you know somebody who has learned how to do something like pen and ink art or something like that, they probably have a bunch of stuff that they bought to figure out if it was good when they started getting more serious about their supplies, and they can give you some kind of middling material to work with while you figure out some of the basics, or while you figure out if that's something that you wanted to do. Just as a random example, if you know somebody who makes fabric on a loom, they'll probably have a small beginner's loom that they can let you use, or that you can buy off of them for less than it would cost you to buy it yourself. because they've upgraded to a larger loom.
Yep.
It's good to talk to these people. A lot of the times, if you offer them some money, you're doing them a favor because you're getting something out of their living space that's just taking up space because they've already settled on something of a higher quality. And then you're also combating another issue, which is just producing a lot of things that are never going to be fully utilized, which is something that our economy does that has the unfortunate side effect of wasting all of our resources.
Yeah, and never rely on just one route of information. If you don't have people available to you, don't just use YouTube. Try to use books, try to use websites. For the YouTube people, get people with like 5 different audience sizes or production values, that sort of stuff. Things like the production, that actually matters. If someone does self-enclosed videos on YouTube or if they stream on Twitch, you're going to learn different things from them.
The information that you'll get off people on Twitch is going to be more diffuse.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Most of the art is old. Most of the music is from the 70s or older, or a lot of it. For most of the people listening to this podcast, there's probably a reason for that. If you look at our political institutions from the 70s, they haven't been really doing well. I tend to think that there's a correlation with art and music, which are explainable along similar terms. We can talk about that some other time, but basically try to go as far back until it's boring. Try to see how people do it in other countries. Try to just use anything you're practicing as a bridge into understanding the wider world. It will help you in extreme political times. It will give you something as a reserve of strength in the future, of confidence.
It might make it easier to survive. Spending more time figuring out the differences between colors will help you differentiate plants from each other.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to do art in perspective will help you figure out how far away from you things are.
Yeah, and how depth works, for sure.
Probably drawing pictures in 2-point perspective will make you better at archery, if I had to guess.
Okay.
Granted that those are both things that I do.
Yeah.
But
well, yeah, I think we've said that same outro 7 times now. But yeah, these are some beans. This is a dog. It just does this. I guess we have those 2 chunks. We have 2 big old chunks.
I think that camera's in like 3 chunks.
Little camera just died.
Yeah, I figured I would get that one going before little camera died.
Yeah, so we'll see you later, even though you can't see us right now because we're ghosts.